Okay, hi, I welcome you to another episode of Learning Stories. This is an audio and video show where we interview a diverse set of learners from the 21st century. On each episode of this show, we interview a guest who has a story to share about how they acquired a set of skills and knowledge in a creative and innovative manner. In the process, we hope to uncover a new understanding of learning as conceptualized, imagined, and narrated by the guest in our show. Today's guest is someone whose work I have always enjoyed. A little bit about Suchin Mehrotra before we jump into this conversation. So, Suchin is a critic and film journalist who covers streaming for the Hollywood Reporter India. He's also the host of the Streaming Show podcast on his own YouTube channel and has written for publications like Film Companion, News 9, and the Hindustan Times, among others. An unabashed mainstream cinema junkie, he sincerely believes that movies and storytelling can change the world. Before we go into the conversation, I will be linking Suchin's YouTube channel, his profile on the Hollywood Reporter India, and his Spotify show. So I'll be linking all of that in the show notes. So do please follow this conversation up with reviewing those links. So, Suchin, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So the first question I wanted to ask you, Suchin, is I know today you are, one of the most well-known film journalists in the country, and I'm saying that as a fan. But what I'm curious about is your childhood. What was Suchin like growing up? What did you study at school? What were your interests outside school? What did your parents do, and how did that influence you, professionally? So it's just an open-ended question about Suchin in his early childhood years.
Uh, okay, firstly, I don't know if I'm one of the most well-known film journalists in the country, but sure, I'll take it. Why not? It's very kind praise. Um, so, what early childhood years? Okay, well, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is I'm a cocktail. I've moved between Bombay, Bangalore, and London every 0 to 4 years consistently since I was born. For my parents just kept constantly moving, so I guess that's a big part of what makes me me in terms of just being someone who's constantly back and forth between the two places and sort of constantly moving, etc. What was I like? That's a very good question. I'd like to think I was similar to I am now. I don't know. I guess I'll just romanticize it on hindsight. In terms of what my parents did, my dad is a solicitor slash lawyer. My mom was basically a housewife, just constantly setting up new households in different each of the three different cities. And yeah, so it's literally one of those. Yeah, for me, the highlight is basically someone who's constantly just had to flip back and forth, part India, part UK, part here, and so like a mixed bag, I guess, which is the term we use to review average movies. So yeah, in terms of what I studied, I mean that's a very broad question. Are you looking at a specific age or?
Um, Probably like high school. In India we study those three streams, or was it
Yeah.
something else for you?
So I was here for ninth and 10th. I was
Right.
in boarding school in Bangalore, and then I was due for my next move. So then for 11th and 12th, I was back in London. I did my A levels there, went to university there, studied economics because that's what you're supposed to do. You are a brown person. We're supposed to stick to what's safe. That's what I did, just because that's what I thought you're supposed to do. Just to, yeah, we are not encouraged to follow the cool creative things. For example, I still don't fully understand what liberal arts is, which is a lot of what they do in America, but it just sounds very interesting and cool, and like you get to like study different very interesting creative things. So yeah, once you do this for a living, on hindsight, you can't help but wonder if you had the chance to explore the creative side when you had the chance when I was younger. But yeah, so I studied economics in university, and then and off the back of that, I worked in banking for 2 years in London because again, that's just what you're supposed to do, and it was fine. I didn't hate it. It wasn't one of those cliche movies where I was depressed and staring at rain. But at some point along the way, I realized that no, this I think there's something else that I really want to do, which is the very boring way of putting it. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question of kid Suchin at all.
Yeah, I'm curious because in this time, Sachin, what was your relationship to movies? The reason I'm asking you this is for me, I remember this distinct memory, watching certain films like Three Idiots and Tare Zameen Par, and somewhere in my subconscious, it set sort of a line of thinking about the possibility of an alternative way of looking at the world. I was entering university when Three Idiots came out, and I was one of those kids that really was encouraged to pursue engineering. And then I think watching that film made me realize that maybe this is not the path for me. So I'm curious if, growing up, um, what was your relationship to films, in your early teenage years and your years at university? And are there any movies that stayed with you from that time?
Yes, a couple come to mind. Firstly, I just wanted to go back to the last question because there's this thought that just occurred to me. But no, there was something about, I was trying to think of like how to describe childhood. There's just the idea of, there's a lot of wonderful advantages that come from being a person who's, from everywhere sort of thing. But I guess one of the disadvantages, there is a very massive sense of confusion about your identity. So I think I was the Bombay slash Bangalore kid who really got the chance to live here. So you're just constantly questioning which box you're supposed to fit in. So yeah, sorry, no, that's the thought that came from that one. In terms of key movie memories, so as a kid, I just love movies as I would assume many kids do. It's weird, we are supposed to tell ourselves that on hindsight there was this very specific relationship we have. What we are feeling and seeing is different from others, but I think for the longest time that wasn't true. I was just a kid who loved it. I mean, the memories that come to mind is I remember, I think we watched Lagan three times in a span of 2 days because it was me and my brother and we were so excited about it. And when you're a kid, you're just responding to these things, and maybe you're not connecting with every aspect of it, but you know when you something makes you feel. I remember the feeling of watching Dil Chahta in cinema same year. I remember a couple of years later, I can't remember the exact year, being in the UK and going to the movies with some friends, and we watched a movie called 51st Dates, which is a really sweet Adam Sandler, Drew Barrymore rom-com. And I just remember that being a film that made me fall in love with the movies. Like it's always sort of the ones you don't expect. So sort of these are the memories that come to mind of just, yeah, just being a kid and loving this thing. Um, and I think it was, and again, then sort of maybe there's something to do with being an introvert, maybe something to do with uh, when I was in the UK for sort of 11th and 12th, and I didn't have I didn't have the sort of the biggest social life, and so you naturally retreat to shows and films, maybe for whatever it is, call it distraction, call it something to do, and I remember that feeling like a very important relationship. And then, but I guess for me the big one that comes to mind is I remember being in university and loving movies. And at that point, it's not the typical cinephile stereotype, which I wish it was, that, you watch everything. And that's not true. You just watch what you love and you just love it a lot. And there was some point during university where, I obviously loved movies and obviously Hindi cinema more than ever. And then there's a certain point when you realize that the way I feel about this thing, which you just think is a no-brainer. You're just another film fan. You start to wonder, no, I feel like there's something deeper here. The way I think about this stuff, dwell on it, is maybe I linger on it a few moments more than my friends who, they enjoy it and it's cool. But no, for me, there was something more there. And sort of you go along with that thought. So yeah, I remember the first time in university feeling that again, there's something here that I feel might be more than just a hobby. And that's when you start interrogating your relationship with the thing and wondering if there's something more to it. But that's me in my capacity as a fan. If you're talking about when I first started trying to do something with films in terms of, so it was 2014. It was Haider, the Vishal Bharadwaj film. I'd watched it. This is while I was working in banking. I remember watching it with a friend, feeling like I've just experienced something deeply special. And I remember coming home, and this is my memory of it, and feeling like I want to write about it. I didn't have any agenda. I didn't. I wanted to write a review of the film. I didn't. It wasn't with a view to post it anywhere or any of that stuff. I just wanted to write about it, and I remember sharing it with a few friends, and them telling me that this isn't entirely rubbish. There's something here. This is not a terrible piece of writing. As to what compelled me to do that, I mean, all I can say is, for me, the one of the biggest influences to me doing what I do is because of Anupama Chopra, who I now work for. She had a show on Star World called The Front Row, And I remember that's probably had the biggest impact on me, because at that time, again, you love the movies, you love show business. You watch these red carpet interviews or whatever used to pass off as entertainment journalism that time. But this was the rare, and so maybe you think that you chalk it up to, of course, you love stars and glamour as much as the next person. But there was something about that show where she was very much surrounded by all those things. She got the stars and filmmakers, but she was talking about the craft. She was talking about the things. She was having a meaningful conversation about the thing that mattered. It wasn't about the silly, frivolous stuff that we hear all too often about. And that's what really got me to think that, no, this, yes, film for sure, but there was something about film journalism specifically that really drew me to it. And there was something to that thought which then led me to write about Heather. And then, long story short, I wrote that review and I decided to start a blog, which became, and I started a blog with a friend, and he said, let's make this a full fledged website. And then I started writing about Hindi cinema regularly. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, before I jump into your journey in film journalism, Suchin, I'm just curious about, your thoughts on how film journalism in India has evolved post-independence. I mean, it is a big timeline, but in terms of language, like the language of film journalism, was it primarily Hindi or English? And if we're looking at the film industry in India in general, you have independent industries in each state. So many states have their own sort of languages. So, like, in terms of how film journalism has evolved in India, since independence, what are your, general observations about how that's evolved, and how do you think the digital sort of, world impacted that trajectory as well?
So I don't have the required brain cells, IQ, or perspective to talk about post-independence, but I
Yeah,
can talk about sort of my experience of it in sort of
yeah,
last decade or so. So, I mean, this is tricky. I'd probably only have negative things to say here. So, I guess the very bare basics of it is, to me, film journalism, reviewing, criticism truly matters, because cinema is an art form. It is a seismic part of culture. It shapes hearts and minds. And nowhere is that more true than in India. I feel like the impact of movies here, the haircuts we get, the way we want to dress as kids, the posters we have at home, the influence of movies here is insane. And I feel like it's film culture here is far beyond what it is, the passion we have for the movies. But what they traditionally have had in the West is, they, alongside all the glamour and the frivolous and the silliness, which is all great and fine, is, very respectable, credible publications, that, whether it's about covering the industry, the trade, whether it's covering, taking films very, very seriously. Whether it's mainstream cinema, whether it's the art of crafting a superhero film, whether it's like the really meaningful independent film. And that pipeline we haven't traditionally had here. That's always been in the niche here. It's ironic that we have such a massive, thriving film culture where, people really, movies matter so much here. Um, and yet we just don't have many people who really want, from a industry perspective, from a journalism perspective, it still remains the exception of people who want to take it seriously, have meaningful conversations about it, outside of all the stuff and the noise and the chaos, but really talk about an actor's process, the craft of filmmaking, what goes into it, all of that stuff. And so that's never been the case here. And at least in my, tenure as a journalist, in the last sort of whatever 7-8 years, there were a couple of publications where movies seemed to matter, art mattered, culture mattered. And when I say art mattered, I'm not, full respect to that, I'm not even talking about, the independent scene and, artsy cinema. I'm talking about taking mainstream cinema incredibly seriously. Talking
mm,
about the craft that goes into Rocky Rani, that's talking about the music of Pritam. These are the big mainstream films. The art of, a film starring Rajnikant, and mass movies and masala movies and all of this stuff. There's so much to talk about and celebrate within that space. Or even if it's to celebrate the underdogs, and that's never really been prominent here. And all I've seen in my whatever brief timeline as a journalist is it's just declining. I mean, it used to be that there were a handful of publications where movies mattered, and now it feels like there's a fraction. Um, so yeah, so I mean, I used to work for Film Companion. That used to be one of the only places that really took it seriously, and we really worked to raise the conversation around film. Obviously, that no longer exists, and now there's the Hollywood Reporter India, and there's aspects of, you get these stray little crumbs. But the Hindu still does some interesting stuff. Frontline magazine will do some stuff. Scroll, Mint. There are these places where meaningful conversations around the movies still exist, but it's very rare. And yeah, it's you're fighting a battle to just exist, basically.
And like, because I know you mentioned Anupama Chopra, and I have very distinct memories of the front row and watching that show back in the day and saying that this is different. The way Anupama Chopra talks about films is different. It's not, it's looking for something more than just what we can see on the surface level. And, I was listening to your other podcast on the Writer Chronicles, where you spoke about, film journalists and their process. And you mentioned that for you, it's the story and the arc. But I wanted to ask you if you could tell me about maybe one or two film journalists, maybe one from India and one abroad. And if you could tell me, as someone that's a film journalist yourself, what have you observed about their process? When they review films, what is it that they see differently? And the reason I'm asking you this is because today we have this world of user generated content, where everyone thinks they're like a film reviewer. I'm just curious, what does a film journalist see differently when they look at films? If you could tell me about this through the examples of two journalists you admire.
Yeah, I mean, I could try my best to do that. Firstly, a couple of things. Firstly, the term film journalist is very, very broad.
Yeah.
So, it tends to encompass a couple of things. In Hollywood, at its most refined, a trade journalist, someone who covers the business of the movies, is different from a film journalist who maybe conducts interviews and covers the industry and writes features, is different from a critic whose bread and butter is to write about, review films and really try to have a very meaningful conversation about each release. In India, like I said, because it's such a, let's put it nicely, different landscape, where that sort of stuff is so limited, you tend to have to be all of the above. You have to be the interviewer, and you're doing features as well, and you're literally the jack of all trades kind of scenario. So I'm guessing, to your question, you're asking me more about critics that I admire.
Yeah.
So I can name a couple. So if we're talking about India, I'll have to give you a list of like 4 to 5, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's
But
great.
firstly, the term critics is very bastardized in India. I mean, it's a tag that gets thrown around. Many of them tend to be cartoons, or it's sort of trade experts, and it's basically various things clubbed under the term of critics. Some of them are influencers. So when you hear someone from the industry use the word critic, it tends to be a very mishmash group of people. Um, Many of them are paid, many of them are whatever. For me, as an audience, I'm saying this as a reader, not as a journalist. Uh, I take reviews very, very seriously. I think they can have a very meaningful impact. So as a reader, I can name. We literally probably have only a handful of true brew critics in India. There's very, very few of them. I can name a few that I admire, most of which I happen to work with, just because that's, like I said, there's about, you could fit all of us in a WhatsApp group. So the two North Stars tend to be Anupama Chopra and Baradwaj Rangan, who's at Galata Plus. These, were sort of the guiding lights for many of us. There was obviously Rajiv Masant in that as well, but he no longer reviews. And in terms of sort of the newer generation, I can name, for me, the finest critics are this Rahul Desai, who's at the Hollywood Reporter India. You know, nobody can write and see and feel a film like Rahul Desai. There's Uday Bhatia at Mint. He's one of the finest critics in the country. He can have a finer conversation, a more nuanced, more meaningful, and more substantial conversation about a film in half the amount of words than most of us can. It's very frustrating. Um, I say that as someone who's very jealous. Who else? There's also, as part of the sort of film companion universe, there's Gayle Sequeira, who can engage with mainstream cinema and get to the heart of it like no one I've ever seen. There's my colleague Pratyush Parasuraman, who I mean, I've learned a hell load of about just engaging with the visual aspects of cinema, of beauty, and really seeing a very different perspective to the way I look at films. He's also started writing books now. He's written a book on Sanjay Leela Bhansali called On Beauty. Yeah, so those are the main ones. And sorry, the last one I'd mention is Vishal Menon. He sort of tends to cover Tamil and Malayalam cinema, and again, the way he can engage with mainstream cinema and have a very incredibly sensible conversation about what others might just call, in quotes, dumb movies. These massive blockbusters that take an incredible amount of effort, heart, and thought than more people realize. And the way he can get to the heart of those, but also write in a very accessible way. I feel like I'm reading his reviews and I feel like I'm having a conversation with a friend. So the Indian landscape, that's very broadly it. I might be missing one or two names. In terms of the US, I mean, who the reviews I look forward to. There's a critic called Sidhant Atlakha who is a freelancer. He writes for various publications. I believe he's from India, but he works out of the US, and he predominantly covers Hollywood. And again, he's another very very talented writer who really can break down mainstream cinema in a very very meaningful way. And the other one that comes to mind is the IndieWire critic called David Ehrlich. I might be completely butchering his surname. He's the IndieWire critic, and again, one of the finest critics. I mean, again, the way he can have very very thoughtful conversations about films that maybe you haven't given a second thought to, make you explore layers in ways that you didn't see them. But still, for me, accessibility matters a lot. The writing should never talk down to me. I should feel like I'm having a conversation with a friend, even if that's an incredibly smart friend. Um, yeah. I mean, those are the ones that come to mind.
Yeah, I think it's a great list. I've actually, taken down some notes, and I look forward to following up on those people. But Suchin, I know when you moved back from London, you moved back to India, and you worked as a freelance film journalist for a couple of years, and you spoke about that website, magicofbollywood.com. And the question I wanted to ask you is this: that for someone that's just coming up as a film journalist, and and they're working in a freelance capacity, what did you do in that 1 or 2 year period that helped you become a better film journalist? Because you mentioned that in India you have to be like a jack of all trades. And what I find interesting in your journey is that, you had this period of training for your banking job, right? You did a degree in economics, but for film journalism, for instance, you don't have a course or a program that you enrolled in. And that's one of the themes of this podcast. How do people learn and acquire skills? So how did you, I mean, what were the skills that you really thought you needed to acquire in that 1 or 2 year period? And what advice would you have for an upcoming film journalist that wants to make their way in this career and field?
Um, so I'll answer that in two parts. Firstly, what skills a critic or a journalist would need, because there are no courses, like you said, and
Yeah.
what I did. So the truth is, there are no courses. I mean, there's obviously, I literally remember it must have been 2014. Was it 2014? Of literally when I realized I want to do this, I would just trawl through the internet and just you know, just voraciously, I don't want to use the word consume, I hate that word, but just taking any knowledge, interviews, write-ups I could find about criticism, because again, there was no structured course available. There's sort of a couple of bits of film appreciation here and there. And that is the case throughout. There is no, in quotes, qualification for it. Most of the people I've mentioned to you tend, who I'm a massive fan of, tend to be self-taught, have fallen into this. Some have trained to be journalists, and maybe there might be that one film appreciation module in your course, etc. But a lot of people just fall into this. So, in terms of the qualification, I mean, it's people who've really, ideally, if the system works, if proven that they have a sufficient amount of film knowledge. Some of them have done it through traditional courses, others are self-taught. The whole corporate following your dream thing, like I did, is not that rare. It tends to be common as well. So you're basically, I remember Baradwaj Ranjan talking about this in at one of his sessions. He basically said the core qualification, not, I guess, qualification and the things you're looking for a critic is someone who loves writing, someone who loves movies, and someone who loves writing about movies. And the third one is very very key. And so, apart from loving those three things, those already come with a lot of assumed experience and qualification. You're basically proving to a publication that you really know your stuff. Your knowledge is pretty strong, and your, most importantly, your ability uh, to write and to sort of express your thoughts in a engaging, sensible, coherent way. So those are basically the rough things. Because yes, ideally, a good critic is, apart from being a good writer, as well as someone who's good at seeing, and the perspective and knowledge, and to bring to that review and having something worth saying, is, yes, it's just an opinion, but ideally it's an informed opinion,
Hmm.
So to your point about the nature of reviewing in 2025, when everyone's a critic because they have social media, I mean, to me, the value of critics I admire actually goes up. It doesn't go down, because yes, in a perfect world, the social media age allows for a lot more new voices. So if someone is a great critical voice, now they have a platform to showcase that, which is great for them. But more often than not, everyone's just shouting at each other. So to me, the value of a Vishal Menon or Gayle Sequeira or Anupama Chopra or Rahul Desai review actually increases now that everyone's a critic. It doesn't decrease, because it again, it's very rare. The amount of times that I will watch a Tamil or Telugu film, and I have all these thoughts, and I just want to find a meaningful piece of writing to help me process what I felt, to get some perspective, to see things I didn't, and the number you can count on your hand is very, very few. So yes, in terms of what I did, at the time it felt very stressful and stupid. I mean, stupid is just another word for brave. But on hindsight, the things I did, in quotes, did make sense. Um so for one, apart from just like loving movies, because so many people say that, they say, oh my god, your job is to watch movies, you must be so lucky. And I mean, that's a very loaded statement. Firstly, you have to watch everything. That there's a lot of stamina required. And most, this is true in Hollywood, and it's obviously far more true in Hindi cinema. The ratio is most things suck or are soul sucking or are very, very middling. It's literally only those 20% of films every year that's really making you feel something. So, but yet you have to, the very fact that every 2-3 times every week you are sitting down in front of a big screen, ready to fall in love again and being open minded, it takes a lot of stamina. So for me, when I started my blog, which was hilariously titled Magic of Bollywood, like you said, for about a year, for myself, just because of the love of the thing, I was just watching as much as I could, going to the cinema every Friday and writing and writing and writing and writing. So that at least gave me that muscle of just write, because then I'm just doing it for myself,
Yeah.
because it takes a long time to find your voice. So you're just getting into that rhythm of watching everything, writing about everything. Now there's letterbox, there's all kinds of avenues to do that. So that was sort of one half of it. And the other half was when I first moved back to Bombay, having quit my overpaid banking job, um, and sort of completely navigating a brand new industry. It was a lot of spending time out of cafes. It was a lot of time. On hindsight, it was very valuable. At the time, it felt very scary, but it was just basically getting a lay of the landscape, understanding the various publications, who the editors are, how do I reach out to them, how do I pitch these publications, just again start writing for slightly more renowned publications to get my the name out, get more bylines, etc., etc. So, or get a sense of the industry, get a sense of sort of the yeah, so be someone who, if somebody just, but a lot, it's really tough, because you do this because you love it. A lot of this stuff you will do anyway. It's the whole thing of like, if you ask a film critic or film journalist what they do every week to upskill themselves, I mean, every week they're probably just tired and trying to get through the week, but they'll probably end up watching all of those things and watching those interviews and watching those video essays, not because they have to, but that's just because that's who they are and that's what they love. So it's like a natural thing you keep doing. Um, so yeah, that's probably the second half of what I'd say. It was like a lot of time becoming the person who just like followed everything and then watched as much as I could. And so technically, if somebody then a year later, which did happen to me, plops you and says, go interview the stand-up comedian, write about this movie, cover this web show, talk to this filmmaker, you are sort of ready to swing into action on all fronts. Not to say that you can be an expert on everything, but you get a you get a sense of the landscape. So yeah, that's basically what I did, summarized very poorly.
Yeah, no, I think you did a great job, Suchin. And like when you do, share your reviews, because I follow you on Instagram and I noticed that, when you're doing it on video, when you're doing it in text, or when you're doing it in audio, is there, or maybe even when you're doing it for like a large newspaper magazine, is there like a set template that you have to follow? Or does that vary depending on what platform you share your review on?
So I guess again, there's two parts to this. One is the format of the review, which tends to be either video or print, and or as in written, or and the second part is different publications and different templates. Um, so yes, so I predominantly started as someone who used to write, for myself, for my blog, for publications, for Film Companion, where I started working full time in 2019. And then I started reviewing for them on video because there was no one covering the streaming space. That's when the Indian streaming space was just taking off. So that's when I started covering streaming, and I started reviewing on video, which again is a very, very different muscle. YouTube is a very interesting space. I mean, there's all kinds of things thrown around these days that nobody reads anymore. So you have to it's all about video. I mean, I don't think that's entirely true, but yes, I'm someone who does YouTube as well as written reviews. Both, it is a different muscle. There's an element of, for me, I'm a writer first, so anything I'm doing on YouTube, everything is written. I can't do anything until, yeah, it's writer first, and then on YouTube it's just the added layer of then assuming you've written something that isn't complete rubbish. You're then just attempting to be comfortable on camera and do justice to what you've written with all the stupid stuff of how you're talking, how you're expressing yourself. I do think YouTube made me a better writer, because the biggest thing that most writers tend to struggle with initially is how I actually sound versus how I think I sound. The early years of any writers, you're trying to emulate the people you like. You're trying to use big words and flowery terms, and you're just trying to sound writerly. Versus just be like, look, it's real writing is, look, exactly how you and me are talking now. It's okay. That, like that's good too. Just be a person, find your voice. And so I think YouTube, writing for YouTube, is because I was writing a lot more conversationally. It forced me to cut out a lot of the crap and just sort of write more like a human being, but still say all the things I want to say, but without, getting carried away. There are downsides of it as well. I mean, YouTube tends to be a lot more, I don't want to use the word snacky, but writing a written review tends to be the optimal way of really discussing the layers and corners of a film. You can really get to the heart of it. YouTube tends to be more sort of slightly more surface level. If I watch All We Imagine Is Light, and you read some of the reviews, the good ones, versus those are the ones that really get to the heart of something like that. Versus YouTube is basically slightly more restrictive, but obviously there is an audience there, etc. So in 2025, it definitely helps to be both. Um, as to the templates of various publications, ideally the way it should work in a refined journalism landscape, which India absolutely isn't for films, is different publications have different voices, different editors, and so you write to each one, and if you're writing for them, then each editor is helping you become a better writer and trying to match what you're going for with the tone of that publication. And this very complicated but important process. That's not how it works in India at all. We don't have a culture of editors here whatsoever, especially within the world of film journalism. So here, what happens is it's far more black and white. If I want to write the kinds of things I write, which is an attempt to have a sensible, meaningful, non-reductive conversation about movies, there are literally probably 3 to 4 places I could do it in the first place, 5 max. And the others tend to be more snackable, or they have those irritating templates, which is the good subhead, the bad subhead, star rating, up, down, versus like, you know, can I just have an 800-word conversation about film? Let's just talk about it. Let's talk about what it's trying to do, how it's doing it, is it doing it well, what's it going for? Let's put it in context, give some perspective. So yes, so here there are again very few publications that let you do the kinds of things that we do, the kinds of things I try and do, or my colleagues do, which is just talk about the thing, without breaking it down into all those silly silos. I mean, if you want to get into all the silly formats, there are some ridiculous ones out there. There's first half versus second half. There's live tweet reviews. There's there's all kinds of very reductive rubbish. But no, it's not something that I engage in. And so yeah, if I'm reviewing something, and a publication says, just put it in bullet points, pros and then cons, I wouldn't be able to do that. Having said that, we're also trying to earn a living within a very diminishing ecosystem, film journalism wise. So yeah, there are times where you have to suck it up and from a purely format perspective, maybe make some compromises. For example, Film Companion stopped doing star ratings a long time ago, because we thought it was very reductive. We're trying to say engage with the review, because most people don't read the review; they'll scroll down, just look at the star rating, and that's it. So we stopped that, which is a wonderful practice. But today, as a freelancer, when I'm writing for the other publications, some of them are asking for those star ratings, and you have to accept that. But yeah, basically, I wish I could tell you that it's very challenging to align your voice with the different publications, but the point is there are literally 4 to 5 of them that exist that let you write the way you want. without any other factors of things being bought or any of that stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, and like I remember, watching Film Companion reviews as a film watcher myself. So I love the work that you and your team, I mean, Film Companion was doing, in the early 2020s and from
As do I.
2009.
I say very proudly, I'm a Film Companion fan first and employee second. So yes, I very much agree.
Yeah, and I feel like it's so important. I remember seeing the roundtable or the discussion you did with the directors from South India recently, and I know one of the panelists had said that there was an issue of reviews affecting how people were viewing these films. And when I heard that conversation, I realized that these reviews do make such a huge difference. And I think having those voices, critical voices, are really important for this overall perception, because it seems like it's this weekend sort of, there's so much riding on that first weekend, and the experience of the film reviewer sort of becomes a lens for a larger number of people. I mean, I'm just speaking for myself, but I'm sure I can say that for a lot of my friends that love films too. But
Um,
Suchin, sorry, go
No,
ahead.
I just wanna yeah, I just wanna add a couple of points there. Firstly,
Yeah,
I this is very tricky territory, but
yeah,
I'll try my best to summarize it. Firstly, I don't know how much reviews impact box office. In a perfect world where there were only honest, credible critics, which is definitely not our world in India, but if that was the world, I don't know how much of an impact critics have on box office. I mean, the traditional logic used to be that the big film will always get watched.
yeah,
Critics maybe probably have a meaningful impact on championing the underdog to say that, here's a great film you may not have heard of. It's bloody worth your time.
yeah.
So again, that's in an ideal scenario. That's not ours. What was being discussed on that sort of conversation you're referring to is from C. Prem Kumar, who's an excellent filmmaker from Tamil cinema. Um, because of the social media age, firstly, within the journalism landscape, most things are bought. That's just the nature of it. So, like I said, there are probably like, you know, credible, honest critics. There are about six of them. Most publications are bought, and to the extent where, like, Karan Johar has talked about this. He's jokingly talked about this in the, saying that, there are very few publications that can't be bought, and he's been honest because that is the nature of the industry. The joke is that they will just literally, and so the space for honesty or truth is so diminished. There are very few voices you can trust, because that's the nature of the social media landscape in 2025. You can just like change the narrative to whatever you want. So most production houses know how to drum up all kinds of noise on social media, even if it's based on crap. So that's another thing that you're fighting. So then there is also an issue of trust, of uh, why should a reader engage with criticism when there is so little of it, and so much, so it just becomes so much harder for them to seek out the honest voices when there's everything working against them. And the other one was, so what C. Prem Kumar was talking about there is, because of the horridness of the social media age, you have a lot of these influencers, cartoons, and idiots who call themselves reviewers. And there's nothing wrong with there are YouTubers who just make videos about films. There's nothing wrong with that. But then, if you're calling yourself a critic, it changes things. And basically, what he was referring to is what a lot of people are doing is they're bastardizing their following. So what they
Hmm.
do is I mean, there are either brokers who will try and reach out to a bunch of YouTubers and say, how much will you charge for a negative or positive review? And then they take that to the producer and say, if you pay me 5 lakhs, I can have all of these people with this combined following say good things. Now, these are not honest critics by any stance. These are, people just doing it for money. And then the reverse of that is, if a producer says no and sticks to their guns, which is full respect, you get these people or YouTubers who will literally say, if you don't pay me, I'm going to only say bad things about your film so I can tank its opening or whatever it is. And then that forces that producer to basically come to their knees. So it's pretty much extortion is the only word for it. So that's what he was talking about, and it's very, very tragic and very sad, but not surprising. And so sort of both as a critic who's trying to do good work, and as a reader who really wants to find meaningful criticism within Indian cinema, these are the kinds of forces you're fighting.
Hmm.
So no, I just wanted to clarify that when you talked about that interview and what he said, because yeah, that is basically the state of things, and it's a mess.
Yeah, and, because I think one of the other things I also particularly enjoyed about the reviews from Film Companion is your other video series and features, where you would actually interview and profile the technicians involved in these film projects. And I particularly remember enjoying those interviews, and that also affecting my experience of watching films in the future. Because for a long time growing up, it was always about the director and the actors, but watching some of the reviews, and I on Film Companion to start off with, but on other platforms going ahead. But I would credit you know that team at Film Companion to really educate me as a viewer. And this is just like raw thoughts I'm sharing with you as someone that's loved the films and grew
No,
up
but
in
I
like this.
fully agree with you, and that's a key part of what journalism aims to do. Criticism aims to do. It's really to discuss and celebrate the art. It's to
Yeah.
talk about, like you said, the artist behind the scenes. It's not just about the actors. There is some stunning production design. Talking about, you might not think that big action movie had an incredible amount of thought that went into its writing, but it really did. I could tell you that cracking a script like Rocky Rani is far harder than cracking sort of a many sort of meaningful independent films, for example. So, the point is there is so much artistry that goes into this, and so much of it you want to geek out about and nerd about and understand their processes and what goes into making these. And they have such, there's so much rich storytelling behind the storytelling, and that's all we're trying to do, is to just get people to take it seriously, not in some sort of smoking in black and white sort of boring intellectual way, in a way that, like, in a way you'd want to talk about anything you love, with excitement, with all of it. So uh yeah, so that's exactly what the ambition is always is. So I'm glad we were able to do that.
Yeah, and like in terms of those 2 years where you were the program coordinator at MAMI, which is the film festival here in Mumbai, I just wanted your thoughts on about the role of film festivals, in a national, like an Indian context and a global context, to bring out stories. Like, what were some things you observed as a program coordinator about this world of films that maybe helped inform your perspective as a film journalist and film critic?
It's a good question. So I was at MAMI for a year as a program coordinator in 2018. It was a game changing um, professional opportunity for me. So literally for me, it was pre and post MAMI professionally. So no, I'm immensely grateful for that. In terms of how it affected, I mean, the basic answer is I stepped away from film criticism and journalism to do this. Obviously, a lot of a lot of my sort of approach to things as a journalist helped me with this, but this was a very very different role, where it's a lot more sort of, there's an events aspect to it. There's this curation, so it's a very different world. I don't know how it impacted me as a critic, but it really gave me a very strong foundation in the world of Indian independent cinema, which I'm very very grateful for. Um, Also, I mean, that's a whole other thing, but like, some of the finest uh, Indian indies are having a bit of a moment over the last 5 years. There's a reason that, you get the All We Imagine Is Light and films like this, where we're really making some of the finest films. I mean, some of the finest documentaries globally made over the last few years have been Indian films, but that's another tragedy, because the best films about India are very often not something you can watch in India, because they just, because of distribution and other reasons. Um, as to um, how it impacted me as a critic, I mean, I don't know, but sorry, your question was about the role of film festivals. I mean, very basically, I think they're essential, because for the longest time, now we're in the era of streaming, but traditionally, before the age of the internet, the only way so many people could be exposed to world cinema outside of Indian cinema was film festivals. It was bringing the best of the world to you. It's the equivalent of me saying that, what if I told you that there is a random, let's call it the UK or US, where their entire definition of Indian cinema is, people dancing around trees because they lived in 20 years ago. But you and me know that's not the case, and there is some very fine Indian cinema being made every year, and you just wish you could collect, 10 of those films from across the country, show it to them, and just show them that, no, this is where Indian cinema is today. So in the same way, for the longest time, film festivals was the only way to bring world cinema to India, to audiences here, and a lot of very wonderful festivals who did that. Um, the other big responsibility, which holds very true till today, is, you know independent films don't they will still have an endless uphill battle of distribution. Like I said, the finest films made year on year are not mainstream films, and they they don't have that theatrical release. People don't know about them. All they have is film festivals as an avenue to for their premiere, to make noise. And I know independent films and art and poetry are very scary terms that make it sound very, very boring, but there are incredibly engaging, in quotes, entertaining films that come out of the space. It just happens to be that they don't star the big faces, so they're not
Mm.
going to get the wide theatrical release. So you're not going to hear about them. But there is an incredibly thriving ecosystem about some of the bravest, most meaningful films about life in India, which can only be found at film festivals, and it's an ecosystem that you just very much hope always, it always thrives. And it is impossible to not just step in outside your comfort zone as an audience, watch something that you know little about, or and you could have your life changed is a very strong word, but you could really have a very significant emotional experience. Um, and and yeah and yeah I mean, and there are many fine festivals. I mean, there's obviously MAMI in Bombay, there's Dharamshala, there's Kerala, there's many of them, and yeah, it's a very, very important ecosystem to give independent films a chance to be discovered. Ideally, I mean, in the West, the way it works, which again we don't have that here, but the whole point of it there is films made outside of the system, which again can be incredibly emotional and engaging and entertaining, um, get a chance to be seen by the world, maybe picked up for distribution. Netflix routinely picks up films at Sundance or things like that, so that's ideally what it should be as well. It's also should be a way to allow these films to be distributed and discovered. Not always the case, but it's a very important ecosystem to watch some of the best films that you haven't seen yet.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think film festivals have just brought so much joy to my life. And it's something I look forward to every year. I wish I could travel outside Mumbai, but Mami is what I have right now, and I deeply cherish it. But a slight, shift in terms of your journey as someone that has been reviewing the OTT world and streaming shows, Suchin. I know that's something you are extremely passionate about, and I'm curious about um, your thoughts on how streaming has evolved in India, at least in the last 7 to 8 years, because I feel like you are someone that has closely observed that space. And right now, with your Spotify and YouTube show, the streaming show, you've got to speak to a lot of people that are pioneers, but also really invested in this space, right? And I know on your YouTube channel, you have questions like why most streaming shows in India are about crime and violence, or what is a writer's room, or the more recent streaming blockbusters. So all of these questions, like as someone that is actively reviewing OTT shows, and you mentioned this idea of the era of streaming and distribution changing, like if you could briefly summarize the start and growth of streaming in India, and maybe talk about a couple of pivotal shows that really push that that trajectory for India as a streaming sort of landscape. I'm just curious about your views on the streaming world here in India right now.
Yeah, sure. So, like you said, this is something I'm very passionate about. I will do my best to summarize it. You are asking this question at a very difficult time because we are in a bit of a, call it a turning point or contraction. So yeah, it's not as exciting today as it used to be. But I will choose optimism today, and I will talk about the good stuff. So yeah, streaming is my beat. It's one of those things where in 2019 when I started, it's when the streaming space was taking off, just as my journalism career was taking off, and they needed someone to cover that space. And I'm one of the few journalists who's pretty much covered the space since its inception. So I've said this multiple times, and I continue to do so today. People seem very disillusioned with Hindi cinema, and rightfully so. It's a very difficult place where very few things are making us, giving us hope of that we're in good hands, and they know what exciting storytelling is, good storytelling is, etc., etc., etc. But the finest Hindi language storytelling over the last few years has all been on streaming. Performances, storytelling, writing, filmmaking, the talent is all there. The finest things coming out each year, including this year, is all streaming shows. Um, and so, I mean, as the reason that is a couple of things. Firstly, the unlike elsewhere, the Hindi feature film theatrically is actually a very restrictive space because it doesn't allow for diversity. They said that multiplexes were supposed to change this, but the point is that in an ideal world, it's very much geared towards, there's the interval, there's the songs, it's geared towards a specific kind of genre or specific. So when you're trying to make something very interesting and distinctive, it's suppose I don't want to do all those things, suppose I don't want song and dance, suppose I want to make a very grounded, gritty thriller, there are challenges there. And so what it first did when it came is it freed a lot of our finest filmmaking voices and gave them, in quotes, freedom. So there's a reason why Rajan DK and Hansal Mehta and Vikramaditya Motwane and Sudeep Sharma and some these to some extent, a lot of Zoya Akhtar and Rima Kakti's work. There's a reason that some of our finest filmmakers who were not making the smash hit blockbuster and not looking to cater to that, streaming really let them tell the stories they wanted to tell the way they wanted to tell them. And that's why the result is some excellent shows across the board. So that's why streaming is so exciting. I cover shows and I always say I'm slightly less depressed than my colleagues who cover films, because the average show I'm seeing is still relatively better. And every year there is still a good, 5 to 10 shows that give you incredible, like 10 shows that really make you feel things, and 5 shows that might blow your mind. And that's very, very exciting. And yeah, because all these platforms kicked off over the last few years, the priority was just making as much stuff as possible. Sorry, is there some sort of, is that
Sorry, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm just going to mute my side. There's a little bit of a construction thing happening in the back, but it won't bother.
That's how we know you're in Bombay. No, completely understandable. I'm surprised that hasn't kicked off here. No, so all I was going to say is the reason over the last sort of few years, I'd say we were in the golden age of Indian streaming, because all these platforms came in: Z5, Sony Live, Netflix, Amazon, Hotstar, and they prioritized quantity. It became about putting out as much stuff as possible. And so there was a very rare time where risk and diversity and different kinds of stories were incentivized. And so you had this massive influx and explosion of acting talent and writers and filmmakers telling all kinds of different stories. And that's why we've had such exciting stories. There are different kinds, the thriller, the comedy, the big blockbuster, all of it. Now we're in a space where there is a bit of contraction. There are fewer platforms, there are fewer shows being made. There's a move towards safety. Budgets have come crashing down, so it's not exactly the arena of that allows for rich storytelling that it used to be, and where everyone's just waiting for dust to settle. So it's just a dicey time. But yes, if we're just talking this, if we're looking to celebrate it since sort of 2018 till today, the kinds of things that we've seen is incredibly exciting. If you want to know what the big turning point shows are, so then these are not necessarily the best shows, but these are, I guess, what you consider the hallmark moments. I mean, Sacred Games is obviously the big one. It was, Netflix's first Indian original. Then there was, Mirzapur is probably arguably one of the most popular shows in the Indian streaming landscape, and it's probably the most defining show, because that's the show that everyone's trying to ape till today. Everyone's trying to make Mirzapur. It is obviously the Amazon show from XL, and it's the big thunderous gangster drama that's incredible fun, and everyone's still trying to reverse engineer that one. There was Panchayat from TVF, where it was a wonderful. It's one of those sort of great shows where like you can't reverse and engineer it. It was such a gentle sort of mix of drama and comedy that was very, very sort of sweet and kind and still meaningful. So that's probably a big one. Made in Heaven, obviously. Family Man is another fantastic one, which sort of defined why Raj and DK are who they are. Scam 1992 is another big one. So probably these, I mean, unless I've missed a couple, I'm sure I have, but these are the big, this Rocket Boys and Sony Live as well. So these are like the big, what I would call turning point shows, which either influenced the genre or were the breakout successes, or really Pata Lok as well on Amazon. So these are the big ones. They all happen to be very good shows for the most part. So yeah, those are what I would call the big turning points.
Yeah, and in terms of regional OTT, Sachin, because a lot of the names you mentioned are these large Hindi or
they're all Hindi, yeah.
Correct. So I'm curious about your thoughts on regional OTT and how that has changed or how that will change in the time to come. Would you see more directors, that make large budget films move into, exploring OTT as a format? I know that's already happening, but if there are any like larger highlights of shows that worked in the regional landscape that you have thoughts on.
So that one's a bit of a tricky one. So yes, within the streaming space, Hindi is a bit more in quotes evolved. They're sort of 5 years ahead of the curve because when all these big platforms came into town, they all focused on Hindi because that is considered to be the main in quotes big market, in India. Um, Even though I don't necessarily feel like that's the case anymore, but so as a result of that, you take the four industries to the south: Kannada, Tamil, Malayalam, and Telugu cinema. Which a case could be made they are far more vibrant today than Hindi cinema. But that's why the big streamers were much slower in the uptick to really prioritize, give the same level of attention there to give originals, given this very rich alternate storytelling space where it wasn't just about theatrical. A Jawan can be made for theaters, but a Kora can be made for Netflix. So those two shows can exist side by side. So that didn't happen quite as much in the other non-Hindi industry. So if we talk about the South specifically, there's also other there issues that they have such a vibrant. Here we had this big pocket of filmmakers who didn't feel like they had a home for themselves in theatrical. I mentioned those names: Vikramaditya Motwani, Sudeep Sharma, etc. So Anurag Kashyap to some degree, Avinash Arun, etc. Whereas there, the theatrical landscape, specifically for Tamil and Telugu cinema, is much more vibrant. Even Malayalam cinema. So, the directors are not as excited by the idea of making shows. It takes 2-3 years. Theatrical is still something that excites them the most. They can turn it around quicker, etc., etc. But yeah, I do think that the South is one space where we will see a lot more interesting work coming over the next few years because yeah, it's just waiting to explode because the talent there is immense. And in terms of non-South, we're saying the word regional. There are various other industries, Marathi cinema, Bengali cinema, etc., Gujarati cinema. So there are a lot of. It's actually a bit of a circus, but basically there's a hell load of smaller streaming platforms that specialize in these specific industries. For example, there's I think in Gujarati there's a platform called Oho. In Bengali cinema, I can't remember the name. The Hoi Choi is the one in Bengali cinema. So there are these smaller niche platforms that have popped up specifically for these in quotes regional languages. And some of them are thriving, some of them are still starting out, and they are trying to basically, rather than be reliant on the big platforms, make their own. There's AHA for Tamil and Telugu in the south, but yeah, I mean, I've very rarely seen something truly fantastic from one of these platforms. But again, I tend to focus more on Hindi. I try and cover big buzzy shows from the south whenever they whenever they do come out. But I do think that in quotes regional space is definitely one thing to look at. I know a lot of more platforms are looking at that space because the Hindi market, in their own words, is very saturated. And I would love to see something that blows my mind, shows wise, in a non-Hindi language. I've tended to see that a lot more in the film space. Shows wise, it's still relatively rare, but I hope we do get to see more of that because yeah, there is yeah, streaming is very Hindi centric, and that's just wrong because even from a box office standpoint, commercially, the most vibrant mainstream cinema right now is all coming from the south. So you just hope that the platforms learn to ride that wave sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and I'm really excited for that growth because I feel like we're such a rich culture of storytellers, and I think each sort of region in our country has its own history and tradition of that. And I feel like the longer format of streaming can give you those stories in a more nuanced sort of way. So, Suchin,
Exactly.
we've sorry, you were saying something.
No, I completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah, and like for the last question, I think we've covered a lot of bases in this chat. And what I wanted to end this, I know it's a very difficult question to ask someone that does this for a living, but maybe a couple of show recommendations and film recommendations. And I'm thinking about shows and films that have stayed with you for a really long time because I follow your reviews. I know a bunch off the top of my head. I know you're a big Rocky and Rani fan. I know you love the Star Trek series. So but maybe two movies and two shows that really stayed with you, and a couple of maybe a single line about why someone should watch that, to give someone an experience of the Suchin Mehrotra sort of review experience to end this podcast.
I'll give you recommendations, but unfortunately, I'll probably end up throwing quite a few at you.
It's
So
okay.
I'm
Go
I'm
ahead. Yeah.
guessing you're talking specifically about Indian streaming recommendations, right?
Yeah, so let's do Indian streaming recommendations to start off with, and then maybe a couple of Indian films as well to end.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. So I will start. I mean, the easy list to this, the easy answer is I'll give you five. So in 2025, like I said, Hindi cinema is, far from the most exciting thing. I can't name a single film that has truly like blown my mind and that I want to celebrate the hell out of Hindi cinema wise in 2025. But there are four shows this year that have been excellent. They've been clutter breaking, that are already making it to the finest shows of the year list. And I'll just give you that. There's Pata Lok season 2 on Amazon Prime. Just excellent, truly excellent. There's Black Warrant on Netflix from Vikramaditya Motwani and Satyanshu Singh, which is about based on a book, tracking the life of inmates and sort of the guards at Tihar jail. Excellent show. There's Sony Live tends to be the place where they have the best underdogs. Some of the finest storytelling is there, but people don't know about it because I guess it's not the biggest platform. But Sony Live has a show this year called Black, White, and Grey. These are all Hindi shows. If you're a true crime fan, this one will blow your mind. And the less you know about it, the better. Just dive in. 6 episodes. I've never seen anything like it globally within the world of true crime. It's truly that interesting and exciting. And the fourth one is Cough on Amazon Prime Video. Yeah, it's basically elevated horror used to sort of talk about some very very interesting issues. And we've all seen elevated horror from the West, horror that really lives in service of making us feel something about a specific something. I've never seen anything like it from India specifically. So those are the four. I'll just give you two more Sony Live recommendations. We all live in the age of crime dramas, and that's what the flavor of the season is. But the best crime show to come out of India is a show called Tabbar on Sony Live. It is the best one, and a lot of people don't necessarily know about it. And the last one I'll give you is the finest show of last year, which again does not get talked about enough, also on Sony Live, is a very sweet slice of life sort of drama comedy called Raat Jawan Hai on Sony Live. It is about three 30-somethings friends navigating parenting and marriage. They all have young kids, and it's that simple, and it is immensely funny and large-hearted and immensely meaningful. And again, very, very different. It's the kind of narrative that really breaks out of all the crime and stuff. So from a streaming series perspective, those are the ones that come to mind. Films-wise, I can give you two recommendations, both from last year. One is both on Netflix. One is a Tamil film called Medagan, which came out. That's C. Prem Kumar's film from last year. It's one of the most, he makes films directly for your heart, and it's just very simply a story about the friendship between two men. That is one of the most sensitive and deeply felt films I've seen in recent memory. And the other one I will recommend from last year is Vikramaditya Motwani's film on Netflix called Control. It is a screen life thriller where the whole film takes place on a screen. It's something we've seen coming out of Hollywood in the past, and it stars Ananya Pandey, who is an actor who doesn't quite get enough credit for her. She really is a very interesting actor when she does those kinds of roles. And Control is an immensely interesting, unnerving film about how social media is going to be the death of all of us. And in the age of AI, it's all the more relevant. So yes, those are, I think, all the recommendations that came to mind.
That's great, Suchin. And on that note, we come to an end of this episode of Learning Stories. For the viewers tuning in and listening to this podcast, what I will be doing is in the show notes, I will be linking Suchin's profiles on Instagram and YouTube. And he's also got this amazing show that I've seen a lot of episodes of called The Streaming Show that's on Spotify and YouTube. So do follow those links. And in terms of the podcast, the reason I started this podcast was to create a kinder and more empathetic version of the internet where we hold space for each other and we also slowly start to appreciate the years of effort, sacrifice, learning, and love that goes into every career. So, Suchin, thank you for throwing light on your work as a film journalist, as a film reviewer, and someone that's really passionate about this world of films. But I know in your bio you mentioned that you're a cinema junkie, but I feel like talking to you after this conversation, I do feel like I've moved more into that direction of knowing that movies and storytelling can change the world. So thank you, Suchin.
No, thank you for having me. This was really, really fun. I hope there was some sort of wisdom and perspective to any of that. But no, it was really, really cool. It's always good to talk about the thing and be reminded of why we do it and why it matters to us. So thank you.
And on that note, we end this episode of Learning Stories. Stay tuned for more such conversations with creators, filmmakers, entrepreneurs, journalists from across the country. And until next time, keep learning.